come to Beergate. We will talk about electoral pacts, but let's talk about the economy and the cost of living crisis first, because the Prime Minister admitted on this programme yesterday to Susanna that the government could be doing a lot more to help with the cost of living crisis.
He rejected that windfall tax on energy firms, but since then... well, actually, before that, BP announced nearly £5 billion in profits. One man who thinks a levy on that would work is the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. Very good morning to you.
Morning.
Well, the Prime Minister explained to me, and this does seem to be backed up by other members of his government, including significantly the Chancellor, they want energy companies to invest. I mean, that's the point.
Yeah.
You don't do a one-off tax because that's just a one-trick pony. You want the energy companies to invest, and then long-term, you can bring energy bills down, and these are green measures which are better for the environment.
Yeah, I heard the Prime Minister in your interview yesterday. I don't think that argument holds water. What we've seen is oil and gas companies in the North Sea make record profits because the global price is so high. So over and above what they expected to make, they've made much more money, in their own words, more money than they know what to do with. What we've said is you should have a windfall tax on that excess profit and use that to help people with their energy bills by up to £600 for those that need it most. That is a practical answer to what has been the single most pressing issue across the whole of the country as I've gone around it. I agree that oil and gas companies need to invest, by the way. That's why we're not proposing that we tax the profit they expected to make, that they scheduled to make, only the profit that they didn't expect to make. And I think I'm right in saying that the BP boss, when the figures came out yesterday, went on to say that if there was a windfall tax, in other words...
They would still carry on investing.
They would carry on investing.
This is Bernard Looney.
He basically blew the Prime Minister's defence out of the water with that.
Yeah, he's the BP chief executive. He has told formally on the record, he said to the Times that they would continue to invest up to £18 billion, even if the government bowed to calls for a tax. He reckoned they could pay for both.
Well, OK, so let's leave the windfall tax then. Let's talk about a slightly more awkward tax for you, and that is the increase in national insurance. Now, this is an increase in order to pay for something everybody supports, the NHS and social care. Anybody who is trying currently to access treatment on the NHS knows about the terrible waits for treatment, and we all know that social care needs to be fixed. The national insurance rise would raise £12 billion. What would Labour do if Labour won a national general election with that national insurance rise?
In relation to the national interest rise, we've said it's the wrong tax at the wrong time. We're the only country in the G7 that is whacking people for more tax in the middle of a cost of living crisis. You will have heard, I know you spoke about Elsie yesterday, people are really, really struggling with their bills across the country, saying, I can't pay my bills.
So you reverse it?
They look in their pay slip last week of the month, and less money is coming in because they've just been taxed even more in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
So you'd reverse the national insurance rise. How would you get the money then?
So we wouldn't have introduced this national insurance rise.
But it's
in relation to the money that they're raising, because I do think there's an important point here, because you're right, they say it will raise about £12 billion, which they say will go to will go to the health service and then on to social care.
Yeah.
I don't think, by the way, it'll ever get to social care. But the interesting and the really important thing here, and the thing that makes me pretty angry, is during the pandemic, the fraud and the contracts that didn't deliver amounted to £11.8 billion
I know,
of loss.
and that's dreadful.
But well, the truth is this will be used to backfill that black hole.
I don't want you to... So your point is you would reverse national insurance rise and you would go after fraud. Is that what you're saying?
I'd certainly go after the fraud. And I, for the life of me, I don't understand why the government won't go hard on this fraud.
Well, they said they'll go after it.
No, they haven't. This is the point. They've not. The National Crime Agency wants to go after this money, and the government is holding back. I don't know why, whether they don't want to be exposed for the extent of the fraud, but when you're asking people, I mean, people are really desperate about their bills. You know this. They're now getting less money in because they're paying tax. We're asking a huge amount. And at the same time, they're entitled to say, why aren't you going after the fraudsters?
Yes,
there are so many
and that's an easy answer. But so can we just establish? So if you got into government in a general election, you would say to people, right, we're going to cut that national insurance rise We're going to sacrifice that to 12 billion. We're going to put the time and energy and money into pursuing the fraudsters from a few years ago in order to fill that hole. And in the meantime, unfortunately, that money's not going to go into the NHS and social care.
Well, look...
Because that doesn't sound like a very sustainable Labour position.
We wouldn't introduce this tax now. I think it's the wrong tax at the wrong time.
Yes, I know. But we're beyond that. We're talking about a general election.
It's going to be
the next general election. You've got to park that.
It will be... I mean, just finish on that and I'll absolutely come to your point. It's going to be self-defeating because the problem we've got is the economy isn't growing. That's why we've ended up with a low-growth, high-tax economy. This will make it worse. Talk to any business and they say if you whack us now with more tax, that will make it harder for us in the next year or so to get back to where we need to be.
So you would reverse it?
Let me come to that, of course. In terms of what we will do going into the next election, obviously I don't know what the state of the economy will then be. Nobody knows what the state of the economy will then be. We will set out our plans when we get to the election in full. We've set out the principles that we will apply. It will be a fair taxation system, particularly for working people. But at this stage, 2 years out, I don't know what the state of the economy will be. But we will set that out in due course.
Would you raise the top rate of income tax?
Well, we will set this out before the election. Right. I don't know what the economy will be. And you're absolutely right to push me, but the Leader of the Opposition, 2 years away from election, not knowing what's going to happen to the economy, can't possibly set out in detail what we'll do.
Well, then, can we
set out the framework and the principle.
Well, then, can we push you on something else that's in... Can we push you on something else that's in the here and now? And this is this electoral pact, which is widely suspected and reported that you've done with the Liberal Democrats. You've had a letter, haven't you, from Oliver Dowden, the co-chairman of the Conservative Party, accusing you of this pact. He says in his letter, I note that in the South West, this is to you, you are standing candidates in 61% of seats, compared with 97% in 2018, and he suggested that the Lib Dems are returning the favour in Northern England. You look at the figures, they do seem to speak for themselves, and that story that they're telling is this. You've done a deal with the Liberals. You've basically said, well, you're more likely to do well in a constituency tomorrow, we'll back off, and vice versa, and the figures seem to underline that. You have done a pact with them, haven't you?
No, we haven't. We are actually standing more candidates in this election than any other party and more than we've stood for many years.
But you're not fighting hard in seats where the Lib Dems are expected to do well, are you? You've backed off.
We haven't got a pact with the Lib Dems. We're fielding more candidates. I've got brilliant teams across the country that I'm with every day. You're fighting a very positive case for the Labour Party in these local elections. I mean, the fact that... Well, firstly, I'm afraid I don't take what Oliver Dowden says very seriously these days, but the fact that a few days before the local elections, the only thing he wants to talk about is a Lib Dem Labour pact, rather than the issue, which is the cost of living, tells you everything about a government that's absolutely out of ideas. It's completely out of touch and out of ideas.
OK.
I defy anybody who's actually been out electioneering to dispute that everybody is saying to me, Keir, I can't pay my bills.
Yep.
What
cost of living, without a doubt, is the headline issue for people.
Really? I mean, it's not the human impact is huge.
When we got canvassed the other day, the people who knocked on our door were Labour, canvassing, obviously, for the Labour Party. And the first issue they brought up was Partygate. Are you upset about Partygate, they said. Now, I believe it is a visceral issue for people. We all obeyed the rules scrupulously. And I am furious on behalf of our viewers who look at allegations and now fines at Downing Street and in Whitehall for people who decided not to follow the rules. The accusation is now that wasn't just at the top of the Tory party and government, that was at the top of the Labour Party. And that you were at this event and had beer and takeaway food at basically a sort of social on the back of a work event, but was not reasonable for work purposes. How do you plead?
Well, Susanna, firstly, let me say I completely understand the emotion you've just described. And we were very careful to abide by the rules. I was the Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years, in charge of all criminal prosecutions across England and Wales. We abided by the rules, and we did it within my family. My wife's father is very elderly and had to shield in difficult circumstances that I won't go into. My wife went and she sat on the pavement outside the house, and all she wanted to do, like many families, was she wanted to just go in and clean. and she didn't because the rules didn't allow her. So I know what that feels like, and that's how seriously we took the rules.
The accusation is that about... Come on, let's cut to the chase here. The accusation that's been made in a number of newspapers is that there were about 30 of you at this work event who had a big takeaway. And there were bottles of beer. And this went on at about 10 o'clock at night. And it doesn't sound like a work meeting at all. It sounds like a bit of a knees-up after a work meeting, which is completely outside the rules. What do you say to the fact that evidence seems to be emerging that there were about 30 takeaway meals and bottles of beer and social intercourse that went on at about 10 o'clock at night? Did that happen?
Let me take that head on. We were, I think, a few days before the elections last year, so 4 or 5 days before the elections. That means, just like today, I'm on the road every day with my team. We're going to different places. As soon as I leave here, I'm getting on the train to Wakefield. No different this time last year. Across the country, going to areas where we needed to campaign. During the day, we were out doing visits, campaigning, going on high streets, knocking on doors where we could. In the evening, we're preparing, we're doing all the other things that a team on the go has to do. That included, when we're in Durham, doing pieces to camera, doing media slots,
people
doing
understand
preparation.
the work thing.
No. So we were in the office.
What about the social thing? You were allowed to work, but there was you couldn't socialise unless that was reasonable for work. So are you trying to say that what you did was reasonable for work purposes?
We were there working. We were doing pieces to camera. We did a members' event.
Why does the fact you're doing pieces to camera make it any different?
I'm explaining why we're in the office.
Right, but why were you in the office with food, takeaway food and beer late at night with 30 people? You've already said your wife couldn't go into her father's flat to clean. So how come so many of you were in a room drinking beer and eating food?
Let me just try and answer that and give the detail. We're on the road. At the end of the day, we're in the office preparing. Now, that evening, from memory, we were doing an online event for members because we have this get out the vote thing for the last few days, which is to get members going. I was doing pieces to camera, which we pre-record to send out at other times. We were clearing documents. We were preparing for the next day. We were doing all the things that we have to do. This is what we do when we're on the road because we're out all day. Now, we were in the office to do that work. At some point, this was in the evening, everybody's hungry, and a takeaway was ordered. It was then delivered into the kitchen of the offices.
Well, it sounds very much like a birthday cake at an event where people were working, which is exactly what the Prime Minister
in Durham, all restaurants
said.
and pubs were closed, so takeaways were really the only way you could eat. So this was brought in, and at various points, people went through the kitchen, got a plate, had something to eat,
Have
and got on with their work.
the police been in touch with you about it? You were asked a number of times yesterday.
You've been accused of evasion in this morning papers. That you were asked 3 times on the Today radio programme yesterday if the police have questioned you in the light of fresh evidence emerging for this so-called party, and you refused to answer. So here's a straight question. Have you been questioned by the police? Have they approached you in recent days?
No, I think they put out a statement last week saying they're not re-investigating, they haven't spoken to me.
And they haven't re-investigated you? They haven't come back to you?
I think they put a statement out last week saying they weren't going to re-investigate.
And if they
haven't contacted you since?
No, they haven't.
They haven't contacted you?
No.
That's clear. All right. Sir Keir, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.